The morning sun on May 23, 1944, broke over the ruined landscape outside Cisterna di Littoria with the kind of harsh clarity that leaves no place to hide. Private First Class Henry Shower crouched in a drainage ditch with his patrol from Company F, 15th Infantry Regiment, 3rd Infantry Division, feeling the weight of his Browning automatic rifle across his forearms. The weapon was 19 pounds of walnut and machined steel, but after 4 months trapped in the Anzio beachhead, it felt like an extension of his body. Behind them, the earth still trembled from the 500 artillery pieces that had announced the breakout offensive just hours before. The German resistance had been fierce. Now, at noon, 4 rifle cracks split the air from their rear. German snipers. They had let the American patrol walk past and were now preparing to cut them down from behind. The standard response would be to take cover, call for support, wait for the odds to shift. Henry Shower stood up instead. He walked deliberately toward the enemy, 30 yards into their line of fire, and stopped. 4 German soldiers with Mauser rifles, each at a different distance, all centered their sights on the lone American standing exposed in the open ground. Shower raised his bar to his shoulder and fired 4 separate bursts, each calculated for a different range. 4 Germans fell. A 5th sniper, positioned behind a house chimney thinking himself safely concealed, received another burst that brought him down before he could fire. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Shower's patrol had survived, but they had no time to process what they had just witnessed, because what happened next would shatter every assumption the German soldiers in that sector held about American infantrymen and their weapons. This is the story of how one Baar gunner's extraordinary marksmanship during a 15 to 20-minute engagement near Cisterna destroyed German defensive positions that should have been impregnable, killed nearly 20 enemy soldiers, and forced a reckoning with a truth the Wehrmacht had been slow to accept: that American industrial firepower had created a new kind of infantry soldier and a new kind of war. To understand the horror that German soldiers felt when they encountered Shower's bar that day, you must first understand what they believed about American troops and their weapons. By May of 1944, the German army had been fighting for nearly 5 years. They had conquered Poland in 28 days, France in 6 weeks, and driven deep into the Soviet Union with what seemed like invincible momentum. The German military doctrine was built on principles that had served them well: superior training, tactical flexibility, and the innovative use of combined arms. German infantry tactics in 1944 revolved around the machine gun, specifically the MG-42, a weapon so devastating that American soldiers called it Hitler's buzzsaw. This belt-fed monster could fire between 1,200 and 1,500 rounds per minute, creating a sound like tearing fabric that signaled death for anyone caught in the open. A single MG-42 could suppress an entire American platoon. German tactical doctrine was simple and effective. The riflemen existed to support the machine gun. The machine gun was the killing weapon. German squads were organized around this principle, with 5 riflemen armed with bolt-action Kar 98 rifles, serving essentially as security and ammunition carriers for the MG-42 gunner and his assistant. This had worked spectacularly well against the French, who still relied heavily on individual riflemen. It had worked against the British, whose Bren guns were effective but came only 1 per section. It had even worked against the Soviets, despite their massive numbers, because Soviet infantry tactics in the early war were crude and wasteful. But the Americans were different in ways the Germans were slow to fully comprehend. The U.S. Army had studied the lessons of the First World War and the early battles of the Second carefully. American doctrine recognized that the infantryman needed firepower that could move with him, that could suppress enemy positions during the advance without requiring a four-man crew to haul it forward. The solution was the Browning automatic rifle, and by 1944, American infantry doctrine had placed this weapon at the very center of squad tactics. Every 12-man American infantry squad contained at least one bar, sometimes two. The bar gunner was the base of fire around which the squad maneuvered. While German squads were built around a crew-served weapon that required setup time, American squads could bring devastating automatic fire to bear from a weapon one man could carry and fire on the move. German intelligence officers knew about the bar. Reports from North Africa and Sicily had mentioned it. But knowing a weapon exists and truly understanding its tactical implications are two very different things. Many German soldiers fighting in Italy still believed they faced an enemy who was mechanically superior. Better trucks, more tanks, endless supplies, but tactically and individually inferior. American soldiers, in the German estimation, were soft, relied too heavily on firepower to compensate for lack of fighting spirit, and would break when faced with determined infantry assault. The Germans were particularly contemptuous of American infantry weapons. The M1 Garand rifle was admitted to be a fine weapon, yes, but it was just a semi-automatic rifle. The bar? Some Germans who had faced it respected its firepower, but many still saw it as just a light automatic rifle, not a true machine gun. It couldn't sustain fire like an MG-42. It only had a 20-round magazine. How much real damage could it do? Henry Schauer was about to provide a comprehensive answer to that question. But first, we must understand the context of the battle unfolding around Cisterna on that May morning. The Anzio beachhead had been a meat grinder for 4 months. When the 6th Corps landed on the beaches at Anzio on January 22, 1944, the strategic goal was bold: cut off German forces defending the Gustav Line at Cassino by threatening their rear, then drive on Rome. The initial landings were a tactical surprise. The Allies got ashore easily, with minimal opposition. But instead of pushing inland aggressively, the Corps commander, Major General John Lucas, had consolidated the beachhead and waited for his forces to build up strength. The Germans, under Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, reacted with characteristic speed and ruthlessness. Within days, an entire new German 14th Army had been assembled around the beachhead from units pulled from across Italy, France, and the Balkans. The window of opportunity slammed shut. What followed was 4 months of brutal attritional warfare in a confined space where neither side could gain a decisive advantage. The 3rd Infantry Division, commanded by Major General John Wilson O'Daniel, known as Iron Mike, had been at Anzio from the beginning. In those 4 months, the division had suffered over 10,000 casualties, killed, wounded, missing, and non-battle losses. Cisterna, a small town that happened to sit at a critical road junction northeast of the beachhead, had become an obsession. The division had attempted to take it in January with catastrophic results. Colonel William Darby's Ranger battalions had been destroyed in the attempt, with over 700 men killed or captured out of the nearly 800 who attacked. Cisterna remained in German hands, a constant threat to any breakout attempt. But by May of 1944, the situation had changed dramatically. The Gustav Line at Cassino had finally been broken after months of fighting. Allied forces were pushing north up the Italian peninsula. The time had come for the Anzio forces to break out and link up with the advancing 5th Army from the south. Operation Diadem had begun. On the morning of May 23rd at 5:30 a.m., 500 artillery pieces within the Anzio beachhead opened fire simultaneously. The earth shook. The German positions around Cisterna, held by the 362nd Infantry Division and elements of other units, disappeared under a hurricane of high explosive and steel. Allied bombers added their payloads to the bombardment. Then 4 divisions attacked toward Cisterna. The 3rd Infantry Division attacked directly toward the town with all 3 of its infantry regiments in line. The 15th Infantry Regiment, which included Shower's Company F, was on the division's right flank. Their mission was to envelop Cisterna from the south and east, while the other regiments pinned German forces in place and attacked from the west. The fighting was immediately savage. The Germans, despite the bombardment, fought with the desperation of men who knew that losing Cisterna meant losing the entire defensive position. They had spent 4 months fortifying every building, every drainage ditch, every possible firing position. The 3rd Division lost over 1,000 men on that first day alone, but they kept pushing. It was in this chaos, shortly after noon on May 23rd, that Shower's patrol found itself in that drainage ditch with 4 German snipers opening fire from behind. What happened in the next 15 minutes would become the stuff of legend, recorded in the official Medal of Honor citation that Shower would receive 5 months later. But to the German soldiers who witnessed it, it was something else entirely. It was the moment when theory collapsed into reality, when all their assumptions about American infantry and American weapons met the unforgiving test of combat. And what they learned in those minutes outside Cisterna was a lesson the German army would continue to learn over and over for the next 12 months until the final surrender. That American industrial capacity had created not just more weapons, but fundamentally different infantry tactics, and soldiers like Henry Shower who could wield those weapons with devastating effectiveness. The 4 snipers who opened fire on Shower's patrol at noon were likely from the 362nd Infantry Division, or one of the other units defending Cisterna. They had taken up positions that should have been tactically sound. Let an enemy patrol pass, then shoot them from behind when they're exposed and can't easily return fire. Standard ambush doctrine, executed countless times successfully on the Eastern Front and in Italy. They had good positioning, they had clear fields of fire, and they were armed with Kar 98 rifles that had been the backbone of German infantry since before the First World War. These were excellent bolt-action rifles, accurate out to 600 meters in trained hands. What they faced when Henry Shower stood up and turned toward them was something outside their frame of reference. The bar that Shower carried was the M1918A2 model, adopted by the U.S. Army in 1938. It weighed 19 pounds empty, chambered the same 30-06 Springfield ammunition as the M1 Garand, and fired from a 20-round detachable box magazine. The M1918A2 had 2 rates of fully automatic fire, 300 to 450 rounds per minute on the slow setting, or 500 to 650 on the fast setting. It had an effective range of 600 yards and could be fired from the shoulder, hip, or mounted on its bipod for more sustained fire. The weapon had been designed by John Moses Browning, perhaps the greatest firearms designer in history, and it showed. The bar was reliable, relatively easy to field strip and clean, and in the hands of a trained gunner, devastatingly accurate. Shower had been carrying and firing a bar since his basic training. By May of 1944, after months of combat in North Africa, Sicily, and Italy, he had fired tens of thousands of rounds through this weapon system. He knew its weight, its balance, its recoil pattern, how to compensate for bullet drop at different ranges, how to lead a moving target, and most importantly, how to control automatic fire in short, precise bursts. The German snipers watched him walk 30 yards toward them in disbelief. This wasn't how American soldiers fought. They usually called for artillery or tanks or air support. They didn't walk directly toward small arms fire. They had 4 rifles trained on one man. They should have killed him easily. Shower stopped, raised the bar to his shoulder, and fired. 4 bursts, 4 different ranges, 4 different elevation adjustments made instantaneously through muscle memory and experience. 4 dead Germans. The entire engagement lasted perhaps 30 seconds. Then Shower spotted the 5th sniper behind the house chimney. Another burst. 5 snipers dead in less than a minute, and the patrol was saved. If this had been all that Shower accomplished that day, it would have been a remarkable feat of marksmanship. But it was only the beginning. Shortly after Shower eliminated the snipers, a heavy German artillery concentration began falling on the patrol's position. Shells burst within 15 yards of their position, throwing dirt and shrapnel through the air. The patrol went to ground, seeking any depression in the earth that might offer protection. And then, through the smoke and chaos, came the sound that every American infantryman had learned to fear, the rapid hammering of German machine guns. 2 MG-42s had the patrol pinned down. The MG-42 was perhaps the finest general-purpose machine gun of World War II. Fed by 50-round belts that could be linked together for sustained fire, it could maintain a rate of fire that made individual shots indistinguishable into one continuous roar. American soldiers described the sound as fabric tearing, or a zipper being pulled, brrrrip, a noise that meant death for anyone caught in the open. The weapon was served by a 2-man crew, with additional riflemen carrying spare barrels and ammunition. A well-positioned MG-42 could dominate several hundred meters of ground, and the Germans knew how to position them for interlocking fields of fire. Now 2 of these weapons had Shower's patrol trapped in the ditch, while German artillery continued to fall around them. Standard American infantry doctrine in this situation was clear. Call for artillery support. Call for mortars. Wait for tanks if available. Coordinate with adjacent units to suppress the German positions while you maneuver around them. Do not, under any circumstances, attempt to assault prepared machine gun positions with a single infantryman armed with a light automatic rifle. Henry Shower left cover and engaged the enemy weapons single-handedly. While artillery shells exploded within 15 yards, showering dirt over him, and while strings of German tracer bullets whipped past him at chest level, visible threads of death crisscrossing the air, Shower knelt in the open. The nearest MG-42 was only 60 yards away. At that range, the German gunner and his assistant could see Shower clearly. They traversed their weapon toward him and opened fire. Shower raised his bar and fired a single burst. The 2 gunners collapsed. 2 more German soldiers immediately ran toward the gun to take over the weapon. This was standard German doctrine. The machine gun was the critical weapon, and it had to be kept in action no matter the cost. Shower cut them down with another burst before they reached the weapon. 4 Germans dead at 60 yards in a matter of seconds. But there was a second MG-42 still firing. This one was 500 yards distant, nearly a third of a mile away. At this range, most soldiers would have considered the target beyond the effective range of a bar, especially firing from an unsupported kneeling position under artillery fire with enemy machine gun rounds cutting through the air around you. Shower inserted a fresh 20-round magazine into his bar, shifted his body to face the distant target, and emptied the entire magazine into the enemy crew. All 4 Germans manning that weapon died. Think about what this meant from the German perspective. You are in a prepared defensive position 500 yards from an enemy soldier. You have the ultimate infantry support weapon of the Second World War. You have overhead cover, sandbags, clear fields of fire. Your doctrine says you are the killing weapon around which all infantry tactics revolve. and a single American soldier with what you've been told is just a light automatic rifle puts 4 bullets into you and your crew with precision fire at a range where you believed yourselves effectively safe from small arms. The psychological impact was devastating, but Shower wasn't finished. The next morning, May 24th, as the patrol attempted to continue their advance, a German Mark VI Tiger tank and another machine gun position, this one just 100 yards away, forced the patrol to take cover again. The Tiger was perhaps the most feared tank of World War II, mounting an 88mm gun that could destroy any Allied tank at ranges beyond 2,000 yards. Its armor was thick enough to shrug off most anti-tank weapons. A Tiger and a machine gun working together should have been able to stop any infantry advance cold. Shower crawled toward the enemy machine gun position. Crawled, mind you, because to stand would have meant immediate death. When he was 80 yards from the weapon, with its bullets cutting the ground around him, and with the Tiger firing directly at him, 4 tank shells burst within 20 yards of his position. Shower stood upright. He raised the bar to his shoulder and killed all 4 members of the German machine gun crew with one burst of fire. Let us pause here and calculate what Shower had accomplished in approximately 15 to 20 minutes of actual combat across 2 days. 5 German snipers dead. 2 machine gun crews at 60 yards. 4 men dead. 1 machine gun crew at 500 yards. 4 men dead. 1 machine gun crew at 80 yards with tank support. 4 men dead. That is 17 confirmed enemy killed, not including the 2 replacement gunners who ran to man the first machine gun. 19 men dead from precision bar fire, many at ranges where German soldiers believed themselves safe from small arms, all while under artillery fire, machine gun fire, and direct fire from a Tiger tank. This wasn't suppressive fire. This wasn't the spray and pray tactics that German propaganda claimed characterized American combat methods. This was surgical application of automatic weapons fire by a soldier who understood his weapons system so completely that he could use it to eliminate targets with a precision that matched or exceeded what trained snipers could accomplish with bolt-action rifles. The German soldiers who survived these engagements, who retreated from Cisterna as the American advance continued, carried back a story that contradicted everything they had been told about American infantry. They had believed that American soldiers were mechanized, yes, wealthy in equipment and supplies, yes, but individually less skilled and tactically inferior. They had believed that the German infantryman with his MG-42 was superior to any American squad with their semi-automatic rifles and light machine guns. Shower's action shattered these assumptions, but he was not unique. He was exceptional, certainly. His actions earned him the Medal of Honor, the highest decoration the United States military can bestow. But he represented something larger than individual heroism. He represented the product of a system. The United States Army in 1944 had created an infantry force built on fundamentally different principles than any other army in the world. The Germans built their tactics around the machine gun as a crew-served weapon requiring setup and support. The Soviets relied on mass and artillery. The British maintained traditional rifle-based tactics modified with section-level Bren guns. The Americans built their entire infantry doctrine around the concept that every squad needed organic, mobile automatic fire that could move with the riflemen. The Bayar was the centerpiece of this doctrine. An American infantry squad in 1944 consisted of 12 men, typically organized as a squad leader, a bar gunner, an assistant BR gunner who carried extra magazines, and 9 riflemen armed with M1 Garands. But this structure was flexible. Some units ran 2 bars per squad. Some consolidated the bar into a fire team of 3 or 4 men. The key innovation was tactical. American doctrine emphasized fire and movement. One element of the squad would establish a base of fire with the Bayar, suppressing enemy positions with automatic fire, while riflemen maneuvered to flank the enemy position. The bar gunner didn't need to kill everyone in the enemy position. He needed to keep their heads down, to make it impossible for them to return accurate fire while the riflemen closed in. This was mobile warfare, and it required mobile automatic weapons. The Germans understood crew-served machine guns. They were excellent with them, but they struggled to counter an American squad where one soldier could lay down suppressive automatic fire, while 9 others maneuvered with semi-automatic rifles that could each fire as fast as a trained soldier could pull the trigger. The multiplicative effect of the bar plus the M1 Garand created a level of squad firepower that no other army could match. And here was the deeper truth that German soldiers were discovering in places like Cisterna. This wasn't about one weapon or one tactic. It was about industrial capacity translated into battlefield capability. The United States produced over 350,000 bars during World War II. Not 350. Not 3,500. 350,000. Every American infantry division had hundreds of them. Every Marine division had even more. Marine doctrine called for 3 bars per squad by 1944. This meant that at any given point along the front line in Italy or France or the Pacific, American infantry could bring automatic fire to bear in quantities that the Germans couldn't match. Consider the mathematics. A German infantry company might have 6 to 9 MG-42s, fearsome weapons, but requiring crews, requiring setup time, requiring ammunition bearers and spare barrels. An American infantry company had 36 to 72 bars, depending on organization, each one mobile, each one able to provide automatic fire within seconds of contact, each one in the hands of a soldier who had been trained specifically on that weapon. When you multiplied this across an entire army, the differential was staggering. By May of 1944, the American forces in Italy fielded multiple divisions, each with hundreds of BAR gunners. The Germans were facing not individual weapons, but a systematic approach to infantry combat that leveraged industrial production into tactical superiority. The Germans had always understood that America's industrial capacity was immense. They had known this before the war started. But there's a difference between knowing abstractly that your enemy can produce more trucks, more tanks, more aircraft, and experiencing the reality of that production translated into infantry weapons that fundamentally change how combat is fought. Shower's action was extraordinary, yes, but across the Italian front, on May 23rd and 24th, there were hundreds of other BAR gunners having their own smaller but cumulatively significant impacts. A German machine gun crew that might have stopped an entire American platoon for hours found themselves suppressed by bar fire, while riflemen flanked them. German defensive positions that should have required artillery or tank support to reduce were cleared by infantry squads using fire and movement with bars and grenades. The cumulative effect was that German tactical doctrine, which had worked so well against the French and the Soviets, was proving less effective against the Americans. This wasn't because German soldiers were less brave or less skilled. They were fighting with the same determination and tactical competence that had carried them across Europe. It was because they were structured to fight a different kind of war. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The Battle of Cisterna continued for 2 more days after Shower's action. The German 362nd Infantry Division fought with characteristic determination, but they were overwhelmed. The 3rd Infantry Division, the 1st Armored Division, and the 1st Special Service Force pushed through and around the town. On May 25, 1944, Cisterna finally fell. The German division defending it had lost 50% of its fighting strength. The road to Rome was open. For the Germans in Italy, Cisterna was one more in a series of tactical defeats that would characterize the entire campaign from this point forward. They would continue fighting skillfully, continue conducting fighting withdrawals and delaying actions, but they were being systematically ground down by an enemy who could replace losses in men and materiel faster than they could inflict them. Henry Schauer's story became one of hundreds of Medal of Honor citations from the Italian campaign. The citation was precise, factual, almost clinical in its description of what he had done. It did not attempt to mythologize or exaggerate. It simply stated that Private First Class Schauer, on May 23rd and 24th, 1944, near Cisterna di Littoria, Italy, had engaged and destroyed multiple enemy positions single-handedly while under fire, killing 19 enemy soldiers with precision bar fire at ranges from 60 to 500 yards. The citation was read at the presentation ceremony on October 18, 1944, at Remiremont, France. Schauer, now promoted to technical sergeant, received his medal from Lieutenant General Alexander Patch, commander of the 7th Army. The ceremony was brief. The war was still. But behind the official citation and the formal ceremony was a story that revealed something profound about the nature of warfare in the 20th century. Schauer had demonstrated what was possible when industrial production, tactical doctrine, and individual skill aligned. The bar that Schauer carried was designed by John Moses Browning in 1917, refined by Army Ordnance through the 1920s and 30s, manufactured by the hundreds of thousands in American factories, distributed to every infantry squad in the U.S. Army, and then wielded by a soldier from Montana who had trained with that weapon until it became an extension of his body. No single element of this system was sufficient. The finest weapon in the world is useless without doctrine to employ it effectively. The best doctrine fails without weapons to execute it. And even perfect weapons and doctrine require soldiers with the skill and courage to use them. The Germans understood weapons. They had produced some of the finest military technology of the war: the Tiger tank, the MG-42, the Messerschmitt fighters, the U-boats. What they failed to fully grasp until too late was that war in the industrial age wasn't just about quality of equipment. It was about the systematic integration of production capacity, tactical innovation, and training into a coherent system that could be replicated across an entire military. One Tiger tank was superior to any single American Sherman tank. But when you could produce 5 Shermans for every Tiger, and when your doctrine emphasized combined arms and mutual support rather than individual vehicle superiority, the qualitative advantage of the Tiger became irrelevant. One MG-42 was a more capable weapon than one bar. But when you put a bar in every squad, and when your squad tactics were built around that mobile firepower, you created a tactical system that the Germans struggled to counter. What made this particularly galling for German soldiers was that they often recognized American equipment as individually inferior in specific categories. The Sherman tank had thinner armor and a weaker gun than German medium tanks. American artillery wasn't more accurate than German artillery. American aircraft weren't faster or more maneuverable than German fighters in most cases. But none of that mattered because the Americans had more of everything, and they had developed tactical systems optimized for fighting with numerical and industrial superiority. The BR was perhaps the perfect symbol of this approach. It wasn't the best light machine gun in the world. The German MG-42 was more capable in most respects. The British Bren gun was more accurate. The Czech ZB-26 had better ergonomics, but the BR was good enough, reliable enough, and produced in sufficient quantities to fundamentally transform American infantry tactics. And American soldiers like Henry Schauer proved that good enough weapons in skilled hands, employed with sound tactical doctrine, could defeat superior weapons every single time. By late 1944, after the fall of Rome and the subsequent fighting in northern Italy, after the Normandy breakout in France, after the steady Soviet advance in the East, many German soldiers had come to a bitter realization. They were not losing because they were less brave or less skilled, or because their weapons were inferior. They were losing because their enemy could absorb losses that would cripple the Wehrmacht, could replace destroyed equipment within days, could field entire new divisions while Germany struggled to maintain the strength of existing units. The strategic implications of this realization were profound and terrifying. If America could produce 350,000 bars, how many M1 Garands could they produce? How many trucks? How many artillery pieces? How many aircraft? And if their soldiers were trained to use these weapons with the skill that Schauer had demonstrated, what hope did Germany have of winning this war? These were questions that senior German commanders had been asking themselves since at least 1943. By mid-1944, the answers were becoming clear to soldiers at every level. Schauer's action outside Cisterna was significant, not because it changed the outcome of the battle. The 3rd Infantry Division would have taken Cisterna regardless. It was significant because it represented, in one compressed engagement, the collision between German military assumptions and American industrial reality. Every burst of automatic fire that killed German soldiers at ranges they thought were safe, every defensive position that fell to tactics they considered crude, every time they were forced to retreat not because of tactical brilliance, but because of overwhelming material superiority, these were lessons in the new reality of industrial warfare. Henry Schauer survived the war. He continued fighting with the 3rd Infantry Division through southern France and into Germany. He saw the surrender in May of 1945. He returned to the United States, married, raised a family, and lived a quiet life in Oregon, working as a carpenter. He died on June 16, 1997, at the age of 78, and was buried in Salem, Oregon's City View Cemetery. His Medal of Honor citation remains a matter of public record, a precise accounting of what one soldier accomplished with one weapon in approximately 15 to 20 minutes of combat. But the story behind that citation reveals something larger, the transformation of infantry warfare in the 20th century, and the moment when German soldiers confronted the truth that superior skill and tactics couldn't overcome the systematic application of industrial capacity to military force. The Germans who survived the fighting around Cisterna, who retreated north toward the Gothic line and eventually toward final defeat, carried with them the memory of soldiers like Schauer. They had seen what American infantry could do when properly equipped and trained. They had learned that their assumptions about American softness and tactical inferiority were propaganda, not reality. They had discovered that the bar, which they had dismissed as merely a light automatic rifle, was in fact the centerpiece of an infantry system that they couldn't match. In the end, 19 confirmed kills with precision bar fire under extreme combat conditions was remarkable. But it was also a demonstration of what was happening across every front where American forces were engaged, the steady, systematic defeat of German forces through the application of industrial warfare. The lesson was clear, if bitter. Quality matters in war. Training matters. Courage matters. But in the industrial age, the ability to produce good enough weapons in overwhelming quantities, to develop tactical doctrine that leverages those weapons effectively, and to train soldiers who can execute that doctrine with skill, that combination was invincible. The Germans had entered the war believing that superior individual soldiers with superior weapons could defeat numerically superior enemies. They had proven this in Poland, in France, in the early campaigns in the Soviet Union. But by May of 1944, in places like Cisterna, that calculus had reversed. American soldiers were proving to be just as brave, just as skilled, and far better equipped. And behind them stood an industrial base that could replace every weapon, every vehicle, every round of ammunition faster than the Germans could destroy them. Henry Schauer, with his bar, standing in the open under artillery and machine gun fire, methodically eliminating German defensive positions with precision bursts of automatic fire. This was the future of warfare, and the Germans were on the wrong side of it. The 3rd Infantry Division pushed through Cisterna and continued north. They would fight through the rest of Italy, then through southern France, then into Germany itself. Schauer would be there for much of that journey, carrying his bar, training new replacements on how to use the weapon, applying the skills he had demonstrated on May 23rd and 24th in dozens of smaller engagements. He became known in his company as a soldier who could do impossible things with a bar. Other soldiers sought him out for tips on long-range shooting, on controlling automatic fire, on reading terrain and anticipating enemy positions. He was quiet about his Medal of Honor, uncomfortable with the attention it brought. To him, he had simply done his job. He had been in a situation where his patrol needed fire support, and he was the bar gunner, so he provided it. The fact that this required standing in the open under fire from snipers, machine guns, artillery, and a Tiger tank was simply part of what the situation demanded. This attitude was perhaps the most American thing about Schauer's story. He wasn't fighting for grand ideological reasons. He wasn't driven by hatred of the enemy or dreams of glory. He was a soldier in a squad with a specific job, bar gunner, and when the situation required it, he performed that job with extraordinary skill and courage. The German soldiers who faced him couldn't understand this attitude. In German military culture, heroic actions were performed for the fatherland, for honor, for ideological commitment. American soldiers seemed to fight for more mundane reasons, for their buddies, to do their job, to get the war over and go home. The Germans often interpreted this as lack of ideological commitment, as a weakness. They failed to understand that soldiers fighting to protect their friends and to complete their mission could be just as determined, just as dangerous, as soldiers fighting for abstract ideals. In fact, in the long, grinding, attritional warfare of 1944 and 45, the American motivation proved more durable. Soldiers fighting for their squad didn't break when the grand strategic situation became hopeless. They kept fighting because the man next to them was counting on them. Schauer embodied this. He stood up and engaged those snipers because his patrol was in danger. He attacked those machine guns because his friends were pinned down. He eliminated that final machine gun under tank fire because that's what needed to be done. And he did it all with a weapon that American industry had produced in quantities sufficient to put one in every squad and with training that had made him expert in its use. The Germans learned these lessons in Italy, and then they learned them again in France, and then they learned them again in Germany itself. At each stage, they encountered American soldiers with bars, with M1 Garands, with overwhelming artillery support, with air superiority, with logistics that could sustain offensives that the Wehrmacht could only dream of. And at each stage, they were forced to retreat, to trade space for time, to watch their army bleed strength until there was nothing left but surrender. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now and don't forget to subscribe.